information about our organization. Future Women Leaders is focused on professional as well as personal development of young Bay Area women leaders. So thanks again for coming.
Hi there, how are you? I'm Anne Obsitnik. Oh my gosh, that is bright. But anyway, that was a past life. I am really happy to come back and talk to this group again. I'm always just so impressed with just what incredibly bright, talented women are part of this organization and come to this every year. And as Linda did mention, I went to Northwestern University to Kellogg. I graduated a long time ago, 97, and loved my experience, had an absolutely fabulous education as well as just 2 years of networking and building friendships and learning, and it was really worth it for me to take the MBA plunge. My background is really very marketing focused. I went to Vanderbilt University. I graduated from there, again, a really long time ago. Worked for 6 years in packaged goods advertising for Faucon and Belding in Chicago, which is an ad agency. Did account management for them, and then saw what my clients were doing and thought, I think that's a little bit more interesting than what I'm doing. So I went back, applied to business school, just like you guys are considering doing, or maybe already doing. And got into Kellogg, which was my first choice, and went through the 2-year full-time program there. Came out of there with a dual major in marketing and organizational behavior. And then it was kind of tech boom right then, so I moved out to San Francisco and went to Intuit. So I'd worked kind of in all these beauty brands and L'Oreal and Unilever and Helene Curtis and shampoos and conditioners and facial products and all this stuff. And all of a sudden found myself in the world of personal finance at Intuit, which was a change, but a good one for me, a real growth experience and a whole new aspect to my career. Worked on the Quicken brand and was product manager on the Quicken brand, launched Quicken 2000, and then left because I kind of missed my consumer packaged goods background. Went to Eve.com, which you guys are probably all young enough to maybe missed that whole period of 2000. It was 10 years ago, but it was prestige beauty brands on the internet, and I headed up marketing for them. Their demise, just like the rest of most of the .com businesses those days, back then, came around 2002, I believe. And then I went and worked on for an internet telephony provider, online internet telephony. So kind of have, in marketing, heading up their marketing department like I had at Eve.com as well. So I have this kind of marketing background, but had children, kind of had my whole family grew, and was looking for a way to re-engage, and Stacy Blackman, who went to Kellogg with me and who is a phenomenal woman with a phenomenal background in entrepreneurship, called me. She was a friend of a friend and said, do you have any interest in kind of doing this new business working with me on this new business as a consultant, helping people get into business schools? And it just felt like it was such a passion for me right away because I had had this experience at Kellogg. I had a really strong marketing background, and in Stacy Blackman Consulting's opinion, really for us to help you get into business school, or for anyone to really market themselves to get into a business school, it is about marketing yourself. It's about packaging yourself. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody, all the consultants within SBC have a really strong marketing background, as well as MBA from usually top 5, sometimes top 10, but usually top 5 business programs, so that we really understand what it takes to get in. We've gone through the process ourselves. We've been at the schools ourselves, and know how to market people. So I've been doing this with Stacy Blackman for about 4 years. I love it. I love working with people like you who are in this time of your life where I think it's such an exciting time. It opens such wonderful horizons for me in my life, and really, this sounds a little corny, I guess, but it really kind of changed my life. Going back to business school really kind of shifted my direction, and in such a positive way. So I'm excited to be here and talk to you. I'm not doing any sales pitch for Stacy Blackman Consulting. I'm here to talk to you about doing the best application you can, answer any questions that you have about applying to business school, about business school in general. And I want this to be more casual. I don't want it to be that, and I mean, I was going to sit, but I actually think I can kind of see everybody better if I stand, so I'll stand. But please, at any time, if you have questions, don't feel like you have to wait for the end for Q&A. Let's just make it a conversation. And as you're going through, if you see something that sparks a question for you, please jump right in and let me know. I'd be happy to do it as we go, all right? And I'll keep my eye on my watch so we don't run out of time, but is that good? Okay, cool. So we can kind of move on. You can press the forward button once. Oh, it's, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna just show this. Okay, so basically, without going too much into each of these, this is going to be the agenda. We're going to talk about business school basics, some facts and myths about applications, because there are a lot out there. Some people believe that there are certain things that are going to be, surefire ways to get you into business school, and they're not necessarily the panacea. What they are looking for, how to develop a winning strategy, and then just some advice, some case studies about some that we took from our business, showing, kind of comparing two people who applied to business school who were pretty darn different, and how the results of their application, and kind of getting started in the application process. Can I just see a show of hands? Who knows that they're going to apply to business school this coming year? For sure. Okay. And the rest of you, I assume, are maybe undecided or just starting to think about it now. Is that correct? Okay. Okay. Yeah, because timing is interesting too. That's another thing we can talk about. The timing of your application is sometimes just in itself is an interesting topic. But if you have questions about that as we go along from different perspectives, I don't want to assume that all of you are definitely applying. Feel free to make sure you get your questions answered as well. Okay. All right. Okay, so why go to business school? Well, obviously, for those of you who aren't decided, there's a number of reasons. To expand your skill set. I came from advertising, so I had kind of this very strong advertising, marketing, messaging background, but not so much of the kind of numbers analysis and quantitative skills. Because in advertising, you do a little bit of that in media. As an account person, but not so much. So that was kind of a weak part of my background. So going to business school really would shore that up, and kind of, I couldn't have jumped into my client, for example, into their job, at least at the companies I wanted to work for, without having an MBA, largely because they want to see that I had that strong analytical skill set. Okay, so for me, going back to Kellogg was a wonderful way to shore that up, to develop those skills, but also to kind of, it's like a filter, right? It shows the employers that you got accepted and you went through the program at the X business school, so obviously you have the skill set. So that's one reason. Increasing your confidence, just in general, leading groups. There are some of us who are really strong in so many different areas, but maybe are a little bit shy in front of in a presentation situation or in a group management situation. Business school can definitely help. You're going to be working in groups and leading teams all the time, so it gives you that practical experience in kind of a more sheltered environment. Learning about new industries, it allows you to even hop to new industries. You can, if you can be an investment banker and all of a sudden go into some type of operational role at a large manufacturer, or be an entrepreneur and become a consultant, or there's all sorts of ways that you can change industries, change jobs, functional roles. If sometimes it's wanting to move forward in your current field, there are a lot of consultants who work for like Bain or McKinsey right out of college, who know that if they get an MBA and they come back to Bain or McKinsey, they'll have to be on a totally different track. So that's another reason. Building a network, and I don't want to underestimate the last point, because that was one of the best things for me about business school, was really the lasting relationships that came out of it. People that I incredibly admire and have continued to be friends with, and I think I will for lifelong. They'll always be part of my life. Who goes to business school? Well, so this top point, I want to make sure you understand, not every school is 70-30, 70 male, 30. There are schools that are a little bit more balanced, especially a lot of the top 5 schools are getting a little bit more balance between female and male ratio. But overall, if you kind of compile all the schools, it is still kind of a 70-30 ratio male to female. Which I would only say in this group is good odds, you know, as a woman, I suppose. But they say, as my friend said, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. So anyway, little women joke, business joke. So on average, still age is about 28 years old going into business school. But you know what? The trend has actually gone younger. I would actually say that it's the male portion skews a little bit older. The females skews a little bit younger. And schools have been really putting a lot of effort into introducing people into their programs at a younger age. So for example, Harvard has the 2+2 program where you get accepted your junior year in college. You do some summer work, actually maybe you do one summer internship, then you go work at a particular corporation that they set you up with or that you interview through them for 2 years, and then you go to business school. So that puts you at about 24 going to business school, which is pretty darn young. But I think the reason that Harvard and Stanford and a few other schools are trending a little bit younger is they realize that for women, there's a kind of window of opportunity that starts to close as women get older, that you start to move into, and I don't want to be sexist because not all of us are trying to raise families or anything, but there is kind of just generally speaking this thing that happens with women where they get to the age where they want to raise a family, and kind of that window of opportunity to take 2 years out of your life and spend it focusing on your education starts to go away. So I think this was in part to attract women and kind of get them into the school before that time in life comes. I think also it has to do with entrepreneurial-minded people, because if you were in college and you're an engineer, let's say, and you had a great idea, and you come out of college and you're not going to apply to business school for 4 years, you've probably just taken that ideal already and run with it. And then the business school has missed the opportunity to bring you in and kind of incubate that idea with you, help you to bring it to fruition. And I think so Stanford was really the one that led the charge on this age-related thing, and Harvard pretty much followed. But I think they realized that there is an important time period that within which it's crucial to attract people who have these ideas and are kind of, coming out of college and thinking about them. So you will notice this. It doesn't mean that if you're 4 or 5 or 6 years out of college that it's going to be harder for you necessarily. But it does mean, like, about maybe 10 years ago, if you had 1 to 2 years of experience, you probably wouldn't have gotten into business school. Now that's kind of changed.
What percentage of the people would you say are going into that program where they get set up with a job through the school versus getting experience?
At Harvard, for example?
At Harvard or
Oh, very small. It's a very small, this 2+2 program, I don't even know if I can tell you what the percentage of the class is, but like they have a big class at Harvard. They have like 800, I think, around 800 people in their full-time MBA each year. For each year it's 800. I wish I knew the exact number. I'm going to say 20.
Okay.
It's 10, and that's my guess. Don't quote me on it, but I would be very surprised if it was any more than that. So you can see the previous industry experience. Undergraduate majors, a lot of people are, you don't have to have a business degree to go to business school. And in fact, most people are coming from other types of, educational backgrounds. So we can kind of move on from there. So how do you apply? Well, for those of you who are in the middle of it already, but for those of you who aren't, the application includes, first of all, an overview of, they want to know your entire history, basically. They want to know where you went to college, maybe where you went to high school, transcripts from all of it, every, college course you've ever taken, even if it was a summer course back home somewhere, anything that had college credit. They'll want to see the grades, they'll want to see the transcripts. They'll want to see your employment history, all your extracurricular history. If you're doing any volunteering at work or outside of work, they'll want to know about that. You fill out the school data forms. You do need to develop a resume, a professional resume that usually they ask you to put in a particular format. You'll have to take the GMAT or the GRE, and I do want to talk about that a little later because there has been a shift more toward the GRE and away from the GMAT, which is pretty big news in the business school world. They take both, but they never used to take the GRE, and now many schools are really open to accepting the GRE scores now. Academic transcripts, you'll have to forward directly from the schools straight to the institutions you're applying to. And then you'll be asked to do for each school a number of essays. You'll be asked to get usually 2, sometimes 3 recommendations from employers, or there are other places you can get them to, but usually your employer is the best source for that. And sometimes an interview. How competitive is the process? Well, it's gotten even more competitive over the last few years. I think the economy has caused a lot of people, especially in the investment banking finance realm, to want to kind of take shelter in the business school for a couple of years and see if they could ride out the storm. So applications last year, I think, were up 25 or 30% versus the year prior. And the year before that, they were up another 20 to 30%. This year, for this past year, the 2009-2010 year, they were pretty steady with the year prior, but that's after 2 years of huge, so it's not that it peaked and then it's coming way back down. It's peaked and now it's kind of stayed a little flat, but very competitive. The acceptance rates there, you can see, are make it a difficult, venture, but obviously, if you're applying to multiple schools, your chances increase. Some admissions facts. So who in here has taken the GMAT? Okay. Who in here feels like, and maybe this is too personal question, feels like their academic kind of history at college was less stellar than they would have wished? Okay. Well, every year the top schools admit individuals with GPAs that are below 3.0 out of 4. So I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not going to get in because, gosh, I didn't graduate cum laude, summa cum laude, magna cum laude, nothing. I was just there, Well, it really, I wouldn't say, if you had D's and F's or something, it's going to be a hard road to climb, or a hard mountain to climb. But if you were an average student and you feel like your background wasn't exceptional, it's not necessarily going to limit you from getting in, because really a lot of what they want to see is what's happened since then. What have you been doing with your career, and kind of what's your vision, and who are you? And this is one little piece of it. So there's no minimum GPA, and I just think that if you really want to go to business school, you should not worry about this. You should accept that you may have to explain something within the application, but don't let that be the thing that makes you think you can't do it. Also, top schools have been known to decline many applicants with less than perfect GMATs. So a perfect GMAT score doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll get in. So if you got a great GMAT score, you might say, oh, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get in. It's really the richness of the kind of patchwork you put together, patchwork quilt of experiences that you put together in your application. And the GMAT is just one measure of that. Now, I do want to mention, while we're here, talking about the GRE versus the GMAT. So I think Harvard started it out where they said, and I think it had to do with the fact that they felt the GMAT was charging exorbitant fees for taking the test, and they kind of got sick of dealing with the fact that there was a stranglehold on these applicants to pay these fees. So they started working with GRE, and now it's not just Harvard. There are several schools that will take either GMAT or GRE. Yes?
I've actually taken the GRE and love this. So, I love the idea that I wouldn't have to take the GMAT because I'm proud of my GRE score. Is there a website or somewhere you can look
Yeah. Well, each individual school. So if you have a list of schools, you'd go through each individual schools, and they would. I don't think there's really a website. There might be on our website if you're a client, there might be like a website that gives you kind of an overview of who takes what. But for you to do it yourself, do a Google search, see if you can pull something up. But just to be safe, I wouldn't even count on that because you don't know how accurate the information you're getting is. I would go to each school's individual website that you're interested and see whether they take either or just one. Yeah.
Are the tests that different? That much different?
Are the tests that much different? I've taken both actually. I thought that. It was years ago, so I don't know. I don't know if the GREs changed somewhat since I took them, like eons, 13, whatever the heck years ago, it was, because I graduated in 97, so I was obviously taking it in like 94 or something. So it might be different. I think that if my memory serves me correctly, there was a little bit more of a quantitative focus on the GMAT and a little bit more verbal focus, but they both cover each. On the GRE, I felt it was a little bit more verbally skewed, and on the GMAT, maybe slightly more quantitatively skewed. But I think the truth of the matter is now these schools feel like it's an accurate measure of both areas of competency, and as a result, they must be fairly similar. That's my impression. The thing that I do want to mention that's kind of an interesting little thing is if you're not a great test taker, let's say that you took the GMAT and the GRE and you're not a good test taker. Right now, that business schools are really always very concerned and interested in their rankings. U.S. News and World Report, Business Week, several different magazines do rankings. Well, and they have to submit. For all of these, they have to submit what the average GMAT score was for the admitted students. They do not have to submit the average GRE score for these rankings at this point. So there's this slight feeling, and it's not, I would say I wouldn't rely on this, but there is a feeling that if you're going to apply, if you are a poor test taker, you might want to submit the GRE score, because the school knows it won't have to submit your score to their ranking. So it's this. Now, if you do well on tests, this isn't really an important point for you. But if you really don't do well, and you didn't do well, if you took both, for example, and you did, fairly similarly on both the GRE and the GMAT, and you think I would probably err on submitting the GRE because it doesn't put them in a position where they're reporting a really low score as an average student score, and so it probably makes them feel a little bit more willing to admit you. So that's just a little tidbit. So Stanford and Harvard, we've already talked about this. They're taking a greater interest in candidates with less work experience. We've talked a little bit about this. Just FYI, if you're young and you wonder whether now's the time, I wouldn't hesitate. I think it's like you're poised perfectly at this point to get in with less experience. And then most schools conduct interviews by invitation only. I think the one exception to that is still Kellogg, which requires with every application you must interview. They don't invite you. Yeah.
Do you have feelings on in-person versus phone interviews?
I do. I think it depends on the person. And I think if you know yourself and you know that you are impressive in person, I think I personally think it's more of an advantage. I also think that when you're on campus, you might happen to be around more decision makers. Whereas if you're doing a phone interview, sometimes they have people who are maybe alumni doing them or students at the school who are doing them who may be involved in the admissions committee, but you have a better chance, I think, if you're actually at the admissions office and doing an in-person interview. That's what I always think.
Do you think maybe that the school would think that you're really, really interested because you would be willing to pay to go travel out there?
Absolutely. I think that's a fabulous point. We'll talk about visiting the campus later, but there's some cases where it just can't be done, right? I mean, there are people who live in China who just don't have the economic means to get on a plane, or for one reason or another, they can't make it there. And I think schools understand that. I think they accept and understand that. But I think to your point, it makes a statement that you did take the effort to go there and to take the tour and get to know the students and visit some classes, and take the interview at the school. But again, sometimes sometimes that's an automatic part of your application process. Like I think Kellogg's the only one right now. But like at Wharton and Harvard and Stanford, you have to be invited to interview. So it might be that you've already gone to the school and done a visit so that you could write your application, because we'll talk about how important a visit can be to enhancing your application. And then all of a sudden, you've gone through that screening process, and then they might say, okay, now we'll invite you for an interview. And that you have an option. So if you've already been to the school, you may not want to have to go back, because it does add up.
Yeah.
Okay, so top schools really look for the same things. They also look for different things, but there's kind of 4 key criteria that they're looking for. They're looking for people who are leaders. When have you demonstrated leadership in your past? And they want to know that you'll be able to demonstrate leadership in the future. They want people who are team players, who know how to not only lead teams, but also how to work with teams and within teams. People with initiative, people who have an idea and don't just stop with the idea, they actually do something about making it happen. And you're going to have to show all these characteristics within an application. And then creativity as well. Some of us are strong on 3 and not as much on the 4th or something, but I'd say you have to speak to every one of these points within any application. And that said, you also need to use really good, solid examples that are descriptive and memorable for each of these, because you don't want it to be that, it's not this route. I am creative because I, did an art board for my product, and that's why I'm creative. It's got to be something that really shows a different heightened level of creativity or teamwork or initiative. So you need to really think through those examples, and they can come from any time in your life, really. Top schools, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
came to me. You said they can come from any time in your life. I heard that they really don't want to hear about the last 2 years of your life. Okay.
That's not true. Now, that said, what I will say is they need to hear about the last 2 years of your life. Okay, so when I'm working with a client, what I often do is I not only look at an essay, I look at the combination of all the essays that they're doing in total. And I always kind of check to make sure that we don't have too much from any one time in their life. So if you focused let's say there were 5 essays, you focused all 5 of those essays on your work experience and nothing about your personal life and nothing about your college experience, nothing about extracurricular volunteer, stuff that you've done, I would say, you're looking a little one-dimensional right now. You're looking like, and especially if you focus just on the last 2 years. So it's a fine balance, because you do need to make sure that they understand you're representing your work experience well, you're representing your most recent work experience well, which is probably the most interesting work you've done, right? Because you're supposed to be progressing. But it's too one-dimensional to stay within the last 2 years of your life. It's a little ho-hum for them, I think. They really are looking for people who have demonstrated those 4 qualities we talked about throughout their life, that it's a pattern. Okay, but top schools also are looking for really different things. They're looking for candidates who for them, I talked about creating your tapestry of experiences and putting them all together, where they're trying to assemble a class that is a tapestry of different types of people, right? They don't want all the same type of person. And some of it is that they may be trying to grow at that school in a certain way. So they may be developing a global management program. And they really need people who have international experience to come in and kind of help be the students who grow and enrich that program with the professors. So, they will seek certain students at certain times. So it's good to know kind of what the focus, if you're going to information sessions, ask, what is the main focus of the school? What is the school really focused on right now? What are you trying to get better at? What is a main driver behind your growth and your expansion as a school? It's always good to ask them that question, because then you can kind of see where you fit into that picture for them. Being different can improve your chances for admission. If you are an entrepreneur and you've been sitting in your garage, coming up with a product, you're different than the probably 1,500 Goldman Sachs, investment bankers who are applying that year. No offense to any Goldman Sachs people, but it is. It's hard if you came from. It's wonderful to have that large company experience. It's a great kind of resume builder, and it gives you a certain amount of credibility because it's a known name. But on the other hand, there's more of you who are all applying and kind of competing with each other. So being different is a good thing in the admissions, in the application cycle, if you can leverage it, if you know how to leverage it appropriately. And being different can also increase your chances when you're actually at the school and they're doing on-campus recruiting. Sometimes the fact that you have a little bit of a different background makes an employer go, you know what? Like, I'm interviewing 15 people with all the same background today. I think I'll throw her in because it's a little something different.
What if it's not either of those? Like if it's like working in development in a nonprofit or something like that?
Oh, that's totally, I'd say that's an experience that sets you apart. Yeah, I think, and
Not really like, oh, we're not gonna think about.
Oh no, I think that like having a background. First of all, a lot of business schools are really expanding their nonprofit programs, and really love having. It's a different beast, right? Like nonprofit management is very different than for-profit corporations. But it's a part of what they're teaching at that school, and it's an important part of what they're teaching. And so they need people with that background. So I think it's something that could be a great differentiator for you. Yeah.
So I'm really glad you brought up the entrepreneur experience. And you're saying someone who's done that sort of just on their own. Let me just give you a quick scenario. For example, some of my friends or myself, just say you have a full-time job, but you have a side business. I've been told by 3 or 4 other consultants to not say that I have a side business because these schools don't want to think that you're not going to be focused while you're in school, say you're going full-time, and they want to keep that separate business completely out of the application. What are your feelings on that?
Well, so you're saying you have a full-time job,
Yes.
and then you have this other thing
Side
you're doing on the side. I think that shows great initiative. I actually think it's a wonderful thing to include. Especially, it's one thing if like your job has gone to hell in a handbasket and you're getting demoted or something, and clearly the fact that you've decided to do this other thing is impacting your work. But if that's not the case and you're doing great there, and they get this is just a passion of yours, and you're willing to put your time and energy, they want that person. That's the type of person they want. They want someone for whom idea generation is not just catchphrase. It's a passion, and it's part of your life. And if I were working with you, I would say that has to be something we really focus on. So I beg to differ with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, talking about creating a winning marketing strategy, I'll just go back and kind of talk about what I typically do with clients. I do this interview with them when I first meet them, and it's this long, exhaustive interview. It goes on sometimes for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, where I ask them all sorts of questions about their childhood, high school, experience, like very personal experiences that go way, way back. What did you do as a kid extracurricularly? What were you really excited about as a kid extracurricularly? What kinds of volunteer stuff did you do back then, if any? What were defining moments back then in your life? Do you remember teachers who really, gave you an incredible paradigm shift? Are kind of this exhaustive list going all the way up to today. And I say that to you because what I then do is I take their answers to that question and I kind of can say to them, look, there's you have 4 to 5 key stories here. Key things about you that I could tell you about you. And I'm seeing it as a trend throughout your life. So I say this to you because I really think, you can do this yourself, where you just sit down and you kind of write out a list of kind of probing questions about your background and just come up with a whole list. Don't answer them as you go. Just come up with them and think about your whole life and really go back and start looking for themes. Start looking for threads that are similar, that are like, I always had this thing for animals, and all the way back up until today, I'm always volunteering with animals or owning an animal or doing this or doing that or whatever. It almost doesn't matter what it is. It's creating stories that show, that personalize you and that bring you to life. You're obviously going to have to talk about your success in the workplace and your, proven results in the workplace. We all know that. But what's going to make you different in your application is this. It's coming up with kind of the key things that are your key stories, your key themes in your life. So brainstorm, I would say, take 4 to 5 key stories, including all the way back, can be very early experience for you all the way up to today. And you should have kind of your key 4 to 5 stories that you use in every application. Now, sometimes you might get shifted around a little bit because they have different questions, on Wharton's application versus Harvard's or versus Stanford's or whatever. But oddly enough, if you really start thinking about these questions, you can pretty much utilize almost any of these key this strategy or these key stories in almost any question that they would ask you on a business, on an MBA application. You really can. Make sure that they highlight to the question about kind of different aspects of your background and making sure it's not just the last 2 years. Make sure it does highlight different aspects of your background, different times in your background, different parts of who you are. Weave the stories throughout the application. Don't focus on any one story throughout the whole application. And make sure that the people that you ask to do your recommendations know these things about you. Give them material that says, here's what I'm trying to, here's basically what I'm trying to tell the business school I'm all about. And I'd appreciate it if you could help me reinforce that story. And I know you can only speak to what you know about me, and I just want to remind you, and here's what I did. And I'll talk a little bit about recommendations in a bit. But that's a whole nother thing that you can do a lot of work to make sure that you get a successful recommendation. There are things you can do. You don't just need to feel like you threw it out to the wind. You can actually do things to keep your recommender on task and on message. Articulate what you bring to the community. So we talked a little bit earlier about understanding what that school is all about, kind of what their focus is these days, what they really look for in a student, what they are trying to project out to the larger community. Really understanding that and showing them that you would be part of that you would be part of what they're trying to project to the outside is very important. And not in a false way. I want to make sure I'm being clear. Don't try to be someone you're not. But there are always going to be ways that your experiences and your values mirror the school's. Find out what they are and talk about those. But be authentic. Confront your flaws. Show that you understand them and make your self-awareness a strength. So many people are real worried about, something in their past, whether it's a bad grade or whether it's, I got fired 2 times in a row because the economy was horrible or I had a horrible boss or whatever it is. Every failure is kind of a step to the next thing in your life, right? And you learn from it and you move on from it. And, I think actually being a person who can talk about that intelligently and communicate what they learned is actually not only going to be not harmful to you, it will actually be somewhat endearing to them that you are able to recognize past failures and be really reflective about it. One of the things that I have always said to the people I work with is applying to business school is kind of like a soul excavation. And if you haven't started it yet, you're going to think I'm being really dramatic. But it really is. It's like you are kind of stripped down to bare bones, and you're talking about yourself in a way you've never talked about yourself. and you're putting it all out there, but you learn a lot about yourself in the process. So even though I felt like when I applied to business schools, I was like, oh, this can't be over with soon enough. But I learned, after, you know, having some success and getting into the school I wanted to go to, I remember looking back and thinking, I learned so much about myself. I never would have known these things about myself. I never would have had the time to sit down and think about that. So I just want to point that out. Don't, you know, there are ways to always take any past, you know, failures and turn them into learning experiences and actually show how you moved on from them. That actually makes you even more strong. Concrete goals are imperative here. Okay, so I can't stress this enough. People often say to me, well, I don't really know what I want to do after business school. Well, believe me, most people probably feel that way. You know, I don't think that we all go to, I think for a lot of people, a large percentage of people, you go to business school to try to figure that out. You know, you kind of know you want to have a certain skill set. You don't know exactly what you want to do. It's a great time in life to reflect and figure that out. But they don't want to hear that. And no one else is putting that in their application. You need to have some type of a goal that you discuss in your application. And again, you know, I'm not saying be unauthentic, but you do need to have something that, you know, why would you go to business school if not to kind of propel yourself forward in a certain direction? And the more clear you can be about that in your application, the stronger your application will be to them. It also is really good to show how things that happened in your past led you to that goal. So it makes sense. It's kind of a story that you're telling them about why you need business school to get to the next. Because, you know, we could all not go to business school and maybe still achieve our goals. Why do you have to have business school to get to that next level? And then I can't stress number 5 enough. Extracurricular involvement is very key in applications. More and more so. These schools are feeling like they really need like world citizens, and they need people who are giving their time, giving their energy to things outside themselves. This just really shows that you, I mean, and actually if you think of it from a kind of selfish standpoint, I'm not sure that this is the only way that business schools are thinking of it, but they're going to want you to be involved as an alumni, right? The best indicator of whether you're going to be willing to be involved in something after graduation is whether you were willing to be involved before. So showing them that you have extracurricular experience and that you took the time out of your own life to do something for other people is very key. And other applicants are doing it, and if you're applying and you haven't got any of that in your background, I'd suggest you know, it may look like it's a short term, oh gosh, you know, they're gonna see that I didn't do this before, but at least, you know, try to get some type of experience in a volunteer capacity. Whether or not, I mean, you know, so is it gonna really help you at that point if it's only the past year that you've done it? Well, maybe. But it also may have taught you some new things, and you may have learned some new things about yourself after having done it that you can bring to light in the application. Yeah.
Do you think it's important to prioritize having at least one extracurricular activity that's really the main focus rather than going to one Saturday volunteer day? Just have one organization that you go to over and over again, and maybe you progress and you hold some sort of position in it or something.
I think, I mean, I think something's better than nothing, so I want to say that. So I don't want to, you know, I mean, if you're a soup kitchen person and you go every Saturday or one Saturday a month, that's awesome. You know, that's very giving. But yeah, I mean, rather than doing like a Habitat for Humanity type one-day thing, I think it is good to show a consistency if you can. But what I guess the message I'm trying to get across is don't have it be that you're like, oh, I don't have time, I don't have this background. Don't let that be the thing that stops you from starting now. Okay. The biggest mistake applicants make, okay, and I talked a little bit about this, trying to figure out who the admissions committee wants them to be, and then trying to write an application that they think the admissions committee would want. So, for example, like they might have preconceived notions about like, oh, Kellogg is a really strong marketing school. You know, you have to have a marketing background. You have to have interest in marketing to go there. Well, not necessarily. You don't at Chicago. You don't necessarily have to have an interest in finance. So don't have this preconceived notion going in that there's one type of person, a prescriptive thing that they're looking for. They're not. Like I said, and I can't stress it enough, that they're looking for this patchwork quilt of people that they're putting together. And more business schools have expanded into new programs, nonprofit programs, you know, you name it, international. They're expanding, and so they want their student body to expand in a similar way. So it's important to be authentic and to show them who you are, because it could be that very different experience that you talked about from high school that's the thing that made them go, aha, that's why we need her. So just keep that in mind. Okay, recommendations. This is interesting because I don't want anyone to feel like recommendations are out of your control. They're not out of your control. And in fact, what we recommend to our clients is that you do a recommendation packet, where you actually put a nice, neat little packet together, which you could do an electronic version or you could do a hard copy version. But you're basically including a copy of your resume, a little letter to them with bullet points about the key things that you're trying to get across about yourself. You know, that I was a leader from the time I was, childhood on. They're not going to talk about or need to talk about your background, but they do need to know the key messages that you want to get across about yourself, and a reminder of key experiences that they've had with you and the results of those key experiences that they could include in the write-up. So, for example, and you don't have to, you think, well, are they going to think I'm rude telling them what to write? Well, you're not writing it for them. You're basically saying, here's my resume, here's what I'm trying to communicate to the schools, and I really appreciate your help in supporting these points. I wanted to just remind you of the key projects that we worked on together, and here were the results of them, and I'd love it if you could speak to some of these as you see as appropriate. But put a little packet together with all that for them, and then keep checking on them and checking on them and checking on them, and make sure that you're keeping them on track, because I've had really hellish experiences and horrendous experiences with some of my clients dealing with recommenders who just were not doing the work. It takes a lot of, just also know that when you do, I've written many recommendations for people, and it takes a long time, especially if you're asked to do a number of schools. Think about whether you want one person to do 5 recommendations for you for 5 different schools. You may want to ask 2 people to do 3 and 2 instead, because it's hours and hours of work if they're really putting the time into it that you hope they will. Your professional references, oh yeah.
So, I mean, like at the beginning of this, how different is one recommendation from the other? Like if you're applying to one business school from the other, can you just say, to leave Harvard, enter Kellogg, you know? Are there
You can reuse a lot, and what I have always done when I'm writing them is I go back and I copy and paste from the original one that I did for that person.
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes they ask different questions though, so you might have to take a different tact. Schools know if they're being cut and pasted because it's maybe not answering the question perfectly. So I always make sure, if I'm cutting and pasting in a person's recommendation, I go back and I make sure that it's worded such that it is answering exactly that question, and that I'm not making it look like a cut and paste job. But yes, you can reuse a lot of it, and that's great. But there are going to be those questions that are unique, that are just going to have to start from scratch. Yeah.
I know a couple of the schools have peer recommendation forms.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what, I work at a really tiny company and don't
Mm-hmm.
really have peers in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about what kinds of things they're expecting from those peer recommendations? Or what
Well, I think what they're trying to get a perspective on is you know, like there are the people that do really well with a supervisor, right? And they, like everything that the supervisor sees is glowing, like they're fabulous, they do. But really, I as a team player, maybe I'm horrible, right? I mean, and they need to know that because it's such a crucial part of your experience at business school is the team projects that you do. And if you've got a real issue with that, they want to know. So that's what the peer thing is about, is understanding kind of how you work with people who you don't have to answer to.
Yeah.
So if you're saying you don't have any, you don't have like a peer at work that you is on a team.
Well, not in my current job, in my
Okay.
last job that I did, but that was a year ago now.
Okay.
So, you know,
So you just have a supervisor.
essentially,
Okay. And no one that you're even.
it's like the company's founders. There's like
Okay.
3 founders of the
Okay.
company. And
Do you
then
have any people that you're working with that are outside vendors or anything that you kind of could say are peer people that you're working with that you have a relationship with?
Really?
Not really. Then you might have to think of it differently. You might have to go back.
I mean,
They-
but would it be appropriate to have a peer from my former job?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you explain that. You
Yeah.
could say in your application, they always have a space where you can say,
Okay.
describe any unusual circumstances if you feel we need to know. I would use that space to say, you'll notice that my peer recommendation is from a year ago. I wish that I could provide one that is a little bit more up to date. However, I'm in an environment where I have 2, co-founding bosses, basically,
Yeah.
and I don't have a peer.
Right.
So I'm having to do, explain that so that they know it's not that you're avoiding it.
Right.
Yeah. So professional references obviously are always best. One of them should be your supervisor. There are always these circumstances where someone's like an entrepreneur and they say, I don't have a supervisor, I'm it. I say, well, then go back to a different time in your life when you had a supervisor and, let's see if we can piece something together. At least some people like to use people from their college. Unless that relationship, like a professor or something, or even like from a volunteer organization you work with that maybe you're very involved in and you know the director of that organization. Unless you have a really great relationship with them, I don't know that I would recommend it. If it's a phenomenal relationship that was really unusual for a professor and a student to have in terms of the work you did together and the results that you generated and how they felt about your success, great, do. But I wouldn't do that instead of a professional recommendation. It's more if you didn't have another option, you could do that. This is a business school recommendation. They want to see how you performed in business. So the third point, choose individuals who know you well and are enthusiastic about writing on your behalf. So a lot of people are like, I should get the most senior person I can to write my recommendation. I'll ask the CEO. I'll ask the senior vice president. He'd probably do it. He likes me. Well, probably unless you have a really great working relationship, you've worked very closely with him and you know that he or she are going to write a glowing, very detailed recommendation, that could be a mistake because that person may not have the closeness to you in terms of being able to observe your everyday work and understand that how you've performed, what you've done, what the results are that you've generated, and they also just frankly may not have the time to put into it. So I would rather that you choose people that really do know your work, who are maybe just one level above you but think that you're incredible and can comment on what you've done, versus someone 3 levels ahead of you who really can't. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the difference between a direct supervisor who might not be super enthusiastic about writing on your behalf versus maybe another supervisor in another different department that knows your work and knows you but isn't your direct report?
Or you don't report directly to him. It's tricky. I mean, if you really think you'd get you never ask anyone to do a recommendation for you that is going to be a bad recommendation.
Yeah.
But they will be asked, is this person reporting directly to you?
Yeah.
They will, and if that person says no, then they know, and then you have to, you're going to have to explain it.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to explain why you chose not to ask your direct supervisor to, I mean, sometimes there's reasons. I mean, I've worked with people, this is a big issue for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They're like, and actually for some people, I can't let them know, it's a horrible economy. If I don't get into business school, I can't let him know that I'm thinking of leaving, he's gonna can me. And I think people understand that, and you can explain that in the application. But just know that the best recommendation you'll get is going to be a strong recommendation from a person who has been observed, who has actually been your direct supervisor. Yeah.
Does it have to be a current supervisor, or can it be like from a previous job?
Current supervisor is best, but you know.
Like I have a particularly great relationship with someone very high up now, but if I'm at a different job later, is it still okay to use him?
Yeah. I mean, you're going to be asked for more than one recommendation. You're always asked for at least 2, sometimes 3. Sometimes it's peer plus a supervisor. Sometimes it's peer, supervisor, and if you have someone reporting to, I mean, it could be a number of different scenarios. But usually they ask for 2 to 3 recommendations, and you would really want your current supervisor to be one of those if possible. Any old supervisors, great. Team members.
Yeah, I always wondered, how do you go about the sensitivity of telling your current supervisor? Like, basically, I'm planning to leave.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think for educational purpose, I mean, I think people get why you want to go back to business school or back to further your education. People are pretty kind about that. I think there are those cutthroat people, and there are industries where it's tougher. And I understand that, but you'd be surprised how kind and understanding people are about education. I mean, it's really to better yourself and to kind of move to and maybe it's you want to be in a new role at that company, or maybe you want to be in a different industry altogether. I think people are a little bit more accommodating than you'd think. I mean, I remember going through it myself and being very scared to tell my supervisor that I was going to be doing this, and she at first was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer, I don't want you to leave, but ultimately, she wasn't going to stand in my way, and we had a good working relationship, and she did keep it on the down low, and she did write the recommendation, and I think I'd say the majority of people will be that way. You might have the odd circumstance that you need to, think through and discuss with other people before you decide to tell them. We've already talked about giving your references information that will help them write your recommendations. Just make it as easy for them as you can. Short of writing it for them, I actually have had 2 or 3 clients now who've called me and said, he wants me to write it. He wants me to write my own recommendation. He says he'll sign it. And I was like, oh, no, because you'd be surprised. Admissions committees are incredibly good at sensing when the voice is the same, and you think you've changed. You think you've made it sound different. You think you've used different language, but these guys are experts, and they read how many thousands of applications, and it's very hard for you to be objective about whether your voice sounds the same in one thing versus another. So I would just say to them, I've been told that they can spot this a mile away, and that it would be really, really a bad thing for me in this application process if I tried to do that. What can I do to make it easier for you? Keep really asking them to do the work if you can make it, and ask what you can do to make it easier. But I really, really don't recommend you writing it yourself. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 3. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you and Grace want to go?
Do you think that in order to kind of avoid the whole repetitive type of recommendation where your 2 professional references are saying the same examples?
Yeah.
Do you think that you should say, okay, this recommender, can you focus this on like my leadership abilities, and the other one, can you focus on the teamwork or I don't know, analysis or something? Do you think that it's
Well, they're going to be asked the same questions, and what most of the recommendation forms, if you read them in I'd say go pick a school just for kicks and look at their recommendation form. They ask about everything in there, so it's hard to focus a specific person on any one thing, because they're asking about leadership they're asking about teamwork, they're asking about this, they're asking about that. And you're right, they might be coming up with the same examples, but that's not necessarily bad. I mean, you might want it to be that, you know, it's nice to get a different perspective, but, you know, hearing that you're great by two people in the same way is consistency. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. You know, if you're hearing, I mean, what I would say to think about is, do you have a different past supervisor that is from a different company who can say the same type of wonderful things about you but in a different organization, so that you can show a pattern of excellence in two different organizations versus two people in the same organization saying you're wonderful. So, you know, that's one thing to think about. But like, let's say you've only worked for one company, and the two people that, you know, you would ask to write your recommendations are going to say some of the same things. I don't think that's all bad. I think that's consistency. It shows that, you know, two people from, you know, who have different perspectives feel the same way about you. Sure. Yeah.
I need 3 recommendations, and I'm mostly applying to MPH schools and some with the MBA.
Okay.
And so I need 3, and I've selected 2 people for my current position. One's my supervisor, and the third person is my college advisor, who I wrote
Okay.
my thesis with, which is about the same topic that I'm going back to school for.
Okay.
He's going to be my
Okay.
strongest, for
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
He is a college professor right now in his downtime, and I don't have all of my stuff together right now,
Mhm.
but I want to send him an email saying, you know, in a month and a half, I'm going to come back to you and ask for this letter of recommendation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I send him this email, do you recommend that I, you know, send it with something so he gets like a refresher of who I am, or just
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
send a quick
Oh.
one now and a big one later?
I would do a quick one now, reacquaint yourselves if you haven't talked with him in a while, and explain just briefly what you're trying to do, where you're trying to apply, what your thesis, remind him what your thesis was and what you want to do, you know, what your goal is with this degree. And then, I would leave it at that. And then say, you know, would you be willing to do this recommendation? And then I'm sure that he or she will say yes. And then you can say, you know, I'll follow up with you with the form, or, you know, I'll direct you to the link that will take you to the form, and I'm going to send you my resume, and I'm going to send you kind of an overview of what my goal is and the key things that I'm trying to tell them about myself, and a kind of just an overview reminder of what we worked on together.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you've been working for a while, and especially in different industries that do not seem related,
Mm-hmm.
should your recommenders also reflect the breadth of your experiences? Meaning, for instance, I used to be in information architecture and user interface design,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm in philanthropy. So
Big
should
change.
my recommendations come from one from that past career and one from my current career, or should it be more reflecting where I am now, which will be consistent with where I will continue to go?
I think the latter. I think if what you're doing now in philanthropy is what you're doing now kind of a springboard, like I know you were talking about going to school, but would the philanthropy position be the closest position to what you want to do?
I don't know yet,
You
but
don't
I
know.
think it makes a better story.
A story, yeah. Yes. So yes, I think my opinion is if you have 3 recommendations, 2 should be from your current position, 1 could be from an old position. If you have 2 recommendations, how long ago were you in the user interface
10
information
years.
architecture?
10
How
years ago.
you were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use that as one of the recommendations. I wouldn't use that up if it was 10 years ago, because you're kind of, what you're going to do is kind of explain why you left that, why it wasn't what you wanted to do anymore. And so the thing that's more relevant is the philanthropy position and why you're there and how you performed there.
And if you have recommenders that, if you're choosing between you mentioned a direct supervisor versus someone who's recognized kind of name,
Yeah.
say Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
would you kind of make a choice to go with the leader rather than your supervisor? Would you recommend that?
I mean, if Rupert Murdoch is going to write a recommendation for you or something, yeah, you know, but just you'd have to make sure that it's a strong recommendation, you know, that it's a really strong recommendation. If it's, first of all, there's a really strong name and that it's still a strong recommendation. I would still say I would never err on, like, if you have 2 recommenders, I would say make sure that the person one of them has to be the person who knows what you're doing day to day and can comment on that. And then if you have a big gun that you want to pull out and you think it's still going to be a good meaty recommendation, because a lot of these people that are really big wigs, they're not going to take the time to fill out these forms. They just really aren't. So do 2 recommendations with people who can talk about you meaningfully, and then ask that big wig to just send a letter on your behalf. It's not one of your recommendations. Just send a letter. Would you be willing, it's not a recommendation, would you be willing to direct a letter to Columbia saying that I would like to go there and that you highly recommend me, and if it's a big name, great, but don't waste your recommendation on that. And I'm not saying it's a waste, I'm just saying they're not going to get kind of content about you out of that. But a letter will get the point across. The letter is someone in a position to know great talent thinks this is a great person. And it'll be put in your file. Sure.
When people send the recommendation, you don't see what they wrote?
No.
Okay, so it goes directly to the school.
Well, I think there is something that, usually you check a box that says, I give up the right to see this, right? And it's not even you give up the right to see it because you want to change it. It's because I think there is an option where your recommender does the thing, and if you have not waived the right to see it, it will come to you, but it's done. Like, what goes in goes in, and then you can read it afterwards. What I always do when I have written recommendations for people is I send it in, and then I give them a copy. Yeah. Most people, and I do recommend that you waive the right to see it, because it's a trust thing with the recommender, and I think it really can disrupt if all of a sudden they think that you're reading it. It just changes the way that I think they think about it. So yeah, and technically, if you don't trust that they're going to give you a good recommendation, you shouldn't be asking them anyway.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I had one going back to the additional recommendations. So I used to be the executive director of a nonprofit, and I had a board, and many of them said, I'm happy to write a recommendation, but I don't think that they're really the right people to do the official ones.
Okay.
So is it worthwhile having them send like an endorsement recommendation letter that's not official? Like, who would you send that to?
You send it to the admissions director. The director of admissions at the school. And I'm not saying, I can't guarantee you that they'll consider it. But it's not hurting anything.
Right.
I wouldn't have 15 people do that, though. And
No,
that's
there's
just downright annoying, what I mean? So, well, just think about it. If every person who's applying to business school is having all these people write these extra letters, it's like, what was the point of the recommendation?
Right.
I'd only do that I really would only do that if it's the situation that we discussed before, which is you've got a power hitter. And you've got a power hitter, you've got a name that people recognize, and they might go,
Right.
If not, I kind of don't know that I'd recommend it, because it does make people feel like you're stepping out of line, you're stepping out of the norm. I think in this case they would, they would say, this is a pretty important person who thinks that this is but again, don't try to skirt the rules, by sliding another one under, So, okay, the school visit. If you have time, you should visit your top schools. And money, obviously. I know it costs a lot of money. But if time and money aren't short, I really do recommend it. First of all, there's nothing like just being at a school to give you a sense for it. So just selfishly, you should really want to go there and see what it's all about before you make a decision. Because you're going to spend 2 years of your life there. You're going to be surrounded by the people there, and you've got to, men are intuitive too, but women are especially intuitive, and we get a vibe. When you get to a place, you get a vibe. You get a vibe for people. You get a sense for where you are, and it's one of women's great strengths is our intuition. And I think, we should take advantage of that and go to the places that we're considering and see how it fits with us. Because, I went and visited a couple of business schools that I was like, no way, this is not going to work for me. It feels too tight, too rigid, whereas other people went there and loved it, right? But for me, it was too much. So selfishly, do it for yourself if you can.